Hey guys, tonight we step into the crackling hearth of another world. Picture yourself waking up not in your soft mattress with a phone buzzing on the nightstand, but in a drafty, timbered house where every beam groans as if it's complaining about your weight on the floorboards. The scent of last night's smoke clings to the air, mixing with wool, stale ale, and that faint tang of damp earth that somehow always sneaks through. A rooster outside crows like it's auditioning for a Broadway show you never signed up for, and the neighbor's goat is already trying to chew on your fence again. Welcome to the everyday reality of a medieval middle-class home, caught right between the back-breaking poverty of peasants and the velvet-draped excess of lords. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this life for long. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when your eyes crack open is the ceiling above you. It isn't plastered smooth like modern drywall. Instead, the rough-hewn beams are blackened from years of smoke curling up from the hearth below. That's right, there's no chimney. Your home breathes through gaps and holes, and most of the smoke simply drifts until it finds a way out. It's not exactly what interior decorators would call healthy ventilation, but it does keep insects at bay and preserves the wooden beams. Silver lining, right? Your bed creaks as you shift. You're not lying on a spring mattress. Instead, you've got a wooden frame stuffed with straw or maybe reeds, depending on how prosperous you've been this season. If you're lucky, there's a linen sheet over it, and if you're really lucky, a blanket woven from wool. Forget memory foam. What you've got is more like memory sticks, every stalk of straw poking in places you didn't know could bruise. And if you think that's rough, remember peasants often slept directly on hay piles in a corner. At least you have a designated bed, middle-class perks. Rising, you feel the chill. Medieval England wasn't central heating country. The hearth downstairs is stone cold in the morning, and your breath fogs up as you exhale. You pull on your kirtle, or if you're a man, maybe a tunic and hose. Nothing screams middle class more than owning multiple garments, and you take care of them because clothing is still expensive. Historians still argue whether middle-class folks had wardrobes in the modern sense, but records do show was where people left specific cloaks or gowns to relatives, which means every garment was an investment. Stepping toward the narrow window, you tug open the wooden shutter. There's no glass, just oiled parchment stretched tight. It lets in a dim glow but also makes your room smell faintly like wet sheep's skin. Outside, you see the street, narrow, muddy, and already alive with noise. Traders pulling carts, a dog chasing chickens, and a woman dumping a bucket of yesterday's waste right out the door. Yes, sanitation is medieval street art. Now here's the quirky tidbit. Many of these homes lean dramatically forward over the street. Builders didn't have perfect blueprints, so each new story often jutted out further than the one below. The result? Streets that felt like the houses were trying to shake hands overhead. Some leaned so badly that neighbors across the lane could literally pass objects through each other's windows. Imagine trading sugar with your neighbor while standing in your PJs and just stretching out of your second story. Efficient, if slightly terrifying. You shuffle down the creaking wooden stairs. The hearth sits at the center and someone, maybe your wife, maybe an older child, has started kindling. The smell of smoke rises again. Breakfast won't be bacon and eggs, those are luxuries. Instead, you're getting yesterday's bread, a little cheese, and maybe pottage, a kind of everything stew that could include peas, onions, cabbage, or whatever was left over. The middle class, though, sometimes had a splash of ale in the morning because water wasn't always safe to drink. Congratulations, you're starting the day tipsy. As you sit on your wooden stool, you notice the uneven floor. Many middle-class houses had simple beaten earth floors on the lower level, though some wealthier ones had wooden planks. Straw was sometimes scattered to absorb spills, mixed with herbs to mask odors. It's the medieval version of Febreze. And remember, your animals might share the lower floor too. Chickens cluck near the door, maybe a goat bleats from a pen just inside. This wasn't rural peasant life, it was town life. But animals were still wealth on legs, and keeping them close meant safety. The atmosphere of your house tells you exactly where you fall on the social ladder. You're not destitute. You're not rolling in velvet robes either. You're in that narrow, precarious band where one bad harvest, one fire, or one plague wave could send you tumbling down into poverty. At the same time, steady work and a bit of luck might push you toward real prosperity, even property ownership. That constant balance between poverty and power defined the middle-class existence. Now let's weave in a fact. Medieval England's middle class was middle class in the way we think of it today, with steady incomes and mortgages. Instead, it was a fluid group often referred to as burgesses or freemen of the town. They weren't serfs bound to land, but they weren't nobles either. Merchants, skilled craftsmen, shopkeepers, and some professionals like lawyers or clerks made up this middle space. And records from towns like York and London show them paying taxes, joining guilds, and slowly creating a unique social identity. But life wasn't comfortable just because you were above peasants. Fires were a constant threat. Homes built so close together meant one spark could wipe out an entire street. Many towns had ordinances requiring water buckets to be kept ready, but let's be honest, half the time, people were more worried about saving their stock of ale than the neighbor's thatch roof. As you finish your simple breakfast, you're already thinking about the day ahead. Maybe you run a small workshop, maybe a shopfront selling cloth, or maybe you've apprenticed your son to a guild. Your place in society hinges not just on wealth but on perception, how people see you. And in the medieval world, perception is power. Let's toss in a fringe tidbit. Some households smeared chicken droppings into their walls as insulation. Believe it or not, dried dung mixed with clay helped seal gaps and keep drafts out. So if you thought your place smelled earthy, well, that's part of the design. Think of it as medieval double glazing. Looking out your doorway, you see your neighbors beginning their day too. On one side, a cooper hammering staves for barrels, on the other, a brewer fussing over casks. Noise is part of your daily soundtrack. Hammering, sawing, the clatter of carts, the shouts of street vendors hawking fish that smell like they've been dead a little too long. The energy is vibrant, but the risk is real. You take a moment, stretching your back, and consider your position. You're not powerless. You might even vote in town matters if you're a property holder, but you're not commanding knights into battle either. You're lodged firmly between. And as you tie your shoes with leather thongs knotted tight, you realize that middle-class life in medieval England is both fragile and fascinating. Because at any moment, a bad bargain, a rival guild, or even the whim of a noble could tilt your world upside down. But for now, your morning has begun, and the day is waiting. You step outside, ducking under the low lintel of your doorway, and the morning rush slaps you in the face like a wet fish. The street is narrow, cobbled only in patches, and puddles of yesterday's rain glimmer with rainbow streaks of waste and spilled ale. You really do have to watch your step, because that bucket your neighbor dumped earlier has already merged into the general river of muck sloshing down the center of the lane. People always say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But seeing this scene, you realize the phrase may not have been entirely metaphorical. Soundscape is overwhelming. Chickens scatter, dogs bark, cartwheels grind against stone, and somewhere a pig squeals indignantly as if auditioning for the medieval version of Britain's Got Talent. The air is a cocktail of sensations. Warm bread from a baker's shopfront mingles with the iron tang of a nearby smithy, while over everything lingers the unmistakable stench of human waste. You cough, tugging your cloak tighter, not because it helps, but because it feels like armor against the smell. This is the world of the medieval town street, and as a member of the middling class, you don't just walk through it, you're woven into it. Every step you take is a negotiation between prosperity and peril. At the corner, a baker's boy calls out, holding up loaves of rye bread still steaming from the oven. Bread isn't just food, it's currency. Prices fluctuate wildly depending on grain harvests, and bakers can get hauled before town officials for short-weight loaves. Some even kept stones in their shops to weigh down the bread and cheat customers. That's why even today we have the phrase a baker dozen, 13 loaves instead of 12, insurance against accusations of fraud. You, of course, inspect your purchase carefully, because nobody wants to be cheated before breakfast. The main street is already bustling with merchants setting up stalls. Bright cloth banners flap, barrels roll, and hawkers shout deals like the medieval version of used car salesmen. Here, where your middle-class status shows most clearly, you're not passing by as a desperate peasant begging for scraps, and you're not gliding through on horseback like a noble. You're here to trade, to buy, to sell, and to gossip, because information is as valuable as goods. One stall sells salted herring stacked in pyramids. Another offers woolen cloth in dull browns and grays. And then there's the spice seller. His little booth looks unimpressive, but inside those tiny jars lies wealth. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, luxuries imported from far-off lands like India or the Levant. Just a pinch can transform a dull pottage into something exciting. But let's be real. Unless you're doing very well this year, you're not buying much spice. You linger, though, pretending to weigh options, mostly to soak in the prestige of even being seen here. Historians still argue whether the middle class at this stage truly had disposable income or were constantly balancing debt and survival. Some records suggest prosperous tradesmen could afford occasional luxuries, but for many, even a few peppercorns were aspirational. Still, you know appearances matter. Even pausing at the spice stall suggests ambition. A donkey brays behind you, startling you into sidestepping into a pile of something you'd rather not identify. Donkeys, mules, oxen, these are the engines of your town. They haul barrels of ale, sacks of grain, and bundles of cloth. Every clatter of hoof or creak of wheel is money moving, contracts in motion. And while nobles talk about honor and glory, your world runs on trade and taxes. Walking further, you notice the houses pressing in overhead. Each level juts outward more than the one below, casting shadows like crooked teeth over the street. Sunlight filters through in slanted shafts, illuminating dust motes that dance like lazy fireflies. You can hear people above you too, mothers scolding children, apprentices arguing, someone singing a tune that suspiciously sounds like the medieval version of a pop hit. Privacy isn't really a thing here. If your neighbor sneezes upstairs, the whole street probably says, "Bless you." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some towns actually had regulations about pigs roaming free because they were notorious troublemakers. One famous case in France records a pig being tried in court for killing a child. Yes, tried, complete with a judge, witnesses, and a sentence. The pig was executed. Medieval justice didn't mess around. So when you sidestep a snorting hog on your way down the street, remember that in some towns, that creature might technically be a criminal. You stop at a cloth merchant's stall, running your fingers over bolts of wool. England's wealth in this era comes from wool, and you're reminded of the saying, England's sheep have golden fleeces. Much of the kingdom's economy is literally growing on sheep's backs. Merchants export wool to the Low Countries, where it's spun into fine cloth. You, as a middling householder, might invest in better cloth for a new cloak, part necessity, part status display. People judge you by what you wear, and sumptuary laws regulate which fabrics and colors are reserved for nobles. You can't just waltz around in scarlet silk unless you're ready for a fine, or worse, a suspicious noble wondering if you're getting above your station. The street narrows as you pass into a lane lined with butchers' shops. Carcasses hang from hooks, blood drips into gutters, and the smell hits you like a hammer. Butchers have a reputation for being tough, loud, and a little rowdy. They're essential, though, and part of the middle-class fabric. Still, you remind yourself not to make enemies here. Nobody wants their reputation literally butchered. Above the shops, signs hang swinging in the breeze. Painted boots for cobblers, keys for locksmiths, tankards for taverns. Literacy rates are rising, but not everyone can read, so images are crucial. A shoe-shaped sign is more reliable than a written advertisement. You wonder what modern branding would look like if it were all icons. Probably McDonald's golden arches carved into wood and hung outside a tavern. By now, you've threaded your way into the marketplace's heart. It's loud, chaotic, and exhilarating. Traders from outside the town have arrived, their accents strange, their wares exotic. You hear stories of goods coming by ship from across the channel, wine from Gascony, olive oil from Spain, silk from Italy. It all sounds impossibly glamorous, even if most of it remains out of your reach. Still, the mere sight of these goods makes you feel connected to a larger world. But the market isn't just about buying and selling. It's about meeting people. Here, deals are made, marriages arranged, disputes aired. You shake hands with a fellow guildsman, exchange gossip with a neighbor, and overhear arguments about taxes levied by the crown. Every word, every glance is part of the invisible economy that sustains you. A boy runs past with a jug of ale, splashing half of it onto your shoes. You mutter, but secretly you're impressed. At least he didn't trip entirely. Alehouses are another heartbeat of the town, and already you can see shutters being lifted, benches dragged out, ready for customers who claim they need a drink for breakfast. By midday, the market is in full swing. Your senses are overwhelmed, your purse a little lighter, your pride a little higher. You're not a peasant scraping by on whatever scraps the Lord leaves, and you're not a noble riding above it all. You're here in the mess of the streets, buying, selling, arguing, laughing, surviving. This is what middle-class life in medieval England really is. A balancing act performed daily on cobbled streets that smell faintly of fish, manure, and opportunity. The further you wander from the clamoring marketplace, the more your day turns towards something even weightier than bread and ale, your guild. Because if the streets are the lifeblood of the town, guilds are the bones. They hold everything upright, your trade, your reputation, your very right to work. Without the guild, you'd be just another peddler shouting into the void. With it, you're part of a brotherhood that can make or break you. You push open the heavy door of the guild hall, and immediately the air shifts. Outside, the street smelled of fish and dung. Inside, you catch the warm scent of beeswax candles, polished wood, and parchment. The hall is large, timbered beams arching overhead, banners of the guild's emblem. Let's say crossed hammers if you're a smith, or golden shears if you're a clothier, hanging from the rafters. The sound is calmer here, voices lowered, the kind of murmurs that make you feel like real decisions happen in this space. A clerk sits at a table, quill scratching, recording dues paid by members. Every guild brother is expected to contribute, and failing to pay can mean fines or worse, expulsion. You drop your coins onto the table, the metallic clink echoing louder than you'd like. That sound isn't just money, it's proof you belong. Guilds are your ticket into legitimacy. In a world where peasants work the land for survival and nobles inherit privilege, guilds are how the middle class carves out its slice of power. They regulate trades, set standards, and protect members from competition. If you're a shoemaker, you can rest easy knowing some outsider can't just roll into town and undercut you. Guild rules make sure everyone charges similar prices and delivers similar quality, or at least, that's the theory. Historians still argue whether guilds were more about community protection or economic monopoly. On the one hand, they provided apprenticeships, charity for widows, and even funeral processions for members. On the other hand, they were fiercely protective of their privileges, sometimes acting like exclusive clubs designed to crush competition. From your perspective, though, both are true. The guild is family, but it's also a gatekeeper. At the far end of the hall, a group of masters sits on benches, cloaks draped over their shoulders, discussing matters of trade. Their voices carry the authority of men who have worked their way up through years of apprenticeship and journeyman labor to reach the top. To become a master, you had to create a masterpiece, an example of your craft so impressive it proved your worth. Some masterpieces still survive in records: an intricate lock by a locksmith, a perfect shoe by a cobbler, a flawless length of dyed cloth. Imagine the pressure. Your whole career balanced on whether that lock clicked shut smoothly. You remember your own years as an apprentice, waking at dawn, fetching water, sweeping the workshop, learning slowly under the stern eye of your master. Apprenticeships could last 7 years, sometimes more, during which you earned little or nothing except board and basic food. Some masters were kind. Others treated apprentices like little more than house servants. And don't forget the hazing. Yes, even medieval teens found ways to prank each other, from swapping dies to hiding tools. That part hasn't changed much in 600 years. Now, as a guild member, you're on firmer footing, but you still feel ambition tugging at you. The masters on those benches live with more security, more respect. They have apprentices of their own, they sit on councils, they influence town law. You're not there yet, but you want to be. That hunger to climb higher without falling into poverty is the heartbeat of your class. The guild hall isn't only about business. Look around and you'll see the traces of ritual and brotherhood. Stained glass windows, if your guild is prosperous, depict patron saints. St. Crispin for shoemakers, St. Luke for painters. Candles flicker before small shrines. You may even have to swear oaths on holy relics when joining, promising loyalty to your brothers. To betray the guild is to betray not just men, but God. At least, that's how it's framed. And yes, guilds throw feasts. That's the part everyone likes. After major religious festivals or town events, guild members gather at long trestle tables, ale flowing, roasted meat steaming, music playing. The hall echoes with laughter, dice games, and gossip. You raise a tankard with your fellow craftsmen and for a few hours feel like the world is yours. But don't be fooled into thinking it's all camaraderie. Politics runs deep. Rivalries simmer between members, disputes over who gets the best stall in the marketplace, who supplies the mayor with boots, who married into which family. Sometimes these tensions boil over into open conflict. There are stories of guild feuds spilling into streets with fists and cudgels, and though you hope it won't come to that in your town, you know better than to rule it out. Let's slip in a quirky tidbit. Some guilds had secret handshakes or passwords, not unlike modern fraternities. These were ways to identify fellow members when traveling. Imagine you're in a strange town, unsure whether the local shoemakers will accept you. Flash the right gesture or phrase, and suddenly you're welcomed like kin. If not, well, good luck. And travel matters, because guild networks stretched across towns and even countries. You might find work in York one year, London the next, and Bruges if fortune smiles. These connections make you feel like part of something bigger than your little lane, like the world has opened its doors just a crack for people like you. Still, ambition is a double-edged sword. You've seen men ruined by chasing too much too fast. One day they're bragging about cornering the market on wool, the next they're begging the guild for charity after a bad shipment rots in the rain. Safety nets exist, but they're thin. The middle-class dream is real, but so is the middle-class nightmare. Above all, the guild reminds you daily that you're not a peasant scraping dirt, and you're not a noble strutting in a silk doublet. You're something new, something fragile, something growing. This in-between space is uncomfortable, sure, but it's also exciting. You and your fellow guildsmen are carving out power where none was meant to be. And as you leave the hall, stepping back into the bright chaos of the town, you carry with you not just tools and trade, but ambition. It clings to your cloak like the scent of smoke, driving you forward, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you'll rise higher still. As you step back into the daylight from the heavy wooden doors of the guild hall, you catch sight of a figure sweeping dramatically down the street. At first glance, the brilliant splash of scarlet in their cloak makes you instinctively straighten your posture. Nobility, perhaps, or perhaps someone testing the limits of the law, because in this world your clothing isn't just fabric stitched together, it's your social ID card. And if you dress wrong, people notice. Sometimes the authorities notice too. That's the thing about being middle class in medieval England. Your whole life is performed in public. Every stitch of your tunic, every shade of your hood, every fur trim on your cloak is basically you shouting your place on the ladder. Step too far up and someone will drag you back down. Step too low and you'll look like you've already slid toward poverty. It's a delicate balance, one you practice every time you get dressed. This morning before heading out, you chose carefully. Wool for your tunic dyed a decent brown, not too dull, not too flashy. Your hose are patched but respectable. On colder days, you might throw a lined cloak around your shoulders. But here, where it gets tricky, what if you wanted that cloak to be trimmed in fur? Rabbit is fine, squirrel maybe too. But don't even think about ermine. That snowy white fur with black tips is the high fashion of kings. If you wore it, you'd be fined, shamed, maybe even accused of pretending to be what you're not. England passed what were called sumptuary laws, rules that dictated who could wear what. They were partly about morality. Too much vanity was seen as sinful, but mostly about control. Clothes were power, and the ruling classes weren't about to let you blur the lines. Statutes from the 14th century spelled it out. Only certain ranks could wear certain fabrics, furs, or colors. Velvet, silk, gold embroidery, off limits unless your income was astronomical. Broadcloth of fine scarlet, reserved. Ordinary townsfolk like you had to settle for plainer hues. Grays, browns, dull greens. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced. Some suggest they were more about sending a message than punishing individuals, like a giant medieval dress code stapled to the church door. But others point to records of fines collected from ambitious tradesmen who dressed above their station. The truth, like many things, probably lies somewhere in between. Sometimes the sheriff had better things to do than inspect your closet. Other times, your rival at the guild might report you just to cut you down to size. Still, fashion is seductive. Walk through town and you'll see tailors advertising cloth in brighter colors than ever before. Advances in dyeing techniques mean that, if you can pay, you can look astonishingly fine. Blue from woad plants, rich yellows from well, deep greens from mixing. These shades brighten the muddy streets like spring flowers. You want to reach for them. Who would? And here's the funny thing. Even with laws, people find loopholes. Maybe you can't wear scarlet, but you can wear a muted red. Maybe ermine is out of reach, but rabbit fur bleached in a certain way passes at a distance. It's a game of pushing limits without crossing them. One scholar described it as a constant negotiation with the eye of authority, which is just a very fancy way of saying you're always asking yourself, can I get away with this? Your shoes clatter on the cobblestones as you pass a group of apprentices. They wear short tunics belted at the waist, their hose baggy at the knees, their caps crooked. One of them struts, clearly proud of his new pointed shoes, so long they curl upward like a scythe. These poolings are all the rage among the fashionable, though church leaders grumble about them, calling them sinful, impractical, even lewd. One preacher thundered that men's shoes pointed so far they could poke the devil in the eye. You chuckle, but you're also tempted. Poolings are ridiculous and stylish in equal measure. The medieval version of buying sneakers that look cool but feel like torture. Nearby, women pass in gowns with trailing sleeves that sweep the ground like banners. The fabric pools elegantly, though you suspect half the dirt from the street comes home with them at night. Hairstyles, too, are statements. A wealthier woman's hair might be hidden under a wimple, or even styled into elaborate horns beneath a headdress. It looks uncomfortable, but then, fashion usually is. Middle-class women copy these styles modestly, careful not to draw accusations of vanity. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit. There are accounts of people renting clothing to appear wealthier than they were, especially for festivals or court appearances. Imagine borrowing a nobleman's gown for the medieval equivalent of prom. Of course, you'd return it covered in ale stains and regret. You, however, know the risks of trying too hard. At the guild, masters are watching. At the market, neighbors are watching. Even in church, all eyes are on you. And church is especially tricky. On feast days, you want to look your best, but not too best. Too much finery and you risk whispers that you're prideful. Too little and you look careless before God. So you aim for the sweet spot. Polished shoes, clean tunic, maybe a belt with a modest buckle. Historians still argue whether the middle class was genuinely obsessed with fashion, or if these anxieties were exaggerated by moralists writing sermons. But one thing is clear. The rise of towns, guilds, and trade gave people like you access to clothing choices unthinkable a century earlier. And with choice comes temptation. Of course, not all your clothes are about status. Some are purely practical. Aprons to protect from workshop soot, gloves to shield your hands from dye, cloaks to keep out the endless English rain. But even practical garments carry weight. A cloak made of thick wool dyed black signals prosperity. Black dye was expensive. A plain, undyed cloak suggests thrift or poverty. Everyone reads your clothing like a scroll. Later that afternoon, you pass a tailor's shop, its shutters wide open. Inside, rolls of cloth are stacked, needles and shears glinting in the dim light. Tailors themselves belong to guilds, wielding influence and jealously guarding their skills. They weren't just sewing, they were sculpting identity. If you wanted to climb a rung socially, the tailor was your best accomplice. Of course, his fees would remind you of your place soon enough. Outside the shop, you overhear gossip. The mayor's wife has been seen wearing imported velvet from Italy. Scandalous. Half the town envies her, the other half mutters about vanity and sin. But everyone notices. That's the power of fashion. It puts you at the center of conversation, whether you want it or not. You think back to your own wardrobe at home. Maybe 2 tunics, 1 decent cloak, a couple of linen shirts, hose, and a pair of shoes that have seen better days. Not much by modern standards, but more than peasants owned. Many villagers might only have 1 outfit total, patched until it was more patched than cloth. By comparison, you live in abundance. And yet, standing in front of that tailor's shop, you still feel the tug of envy. That's the middle-class dilemma in a nutshell. You're proud of what you've earned, proud of the dignity your clothing signals, but you're also painfully aware of the next rung above you. Fashion becomes the battlefield where your ambitions clash with your reality. 1 hem too long, 1 dye too bright, and suddenly you're pretending to be something you're not. But oh, the temptation. As evening shadows stretch, you head home, passing again the figure in scarlet you saw earlier. This time you notice whispers following them. Admiration, suspicion, envy, all tangled together. That's the power of cloth in this world. It speaks louder than words. And as you close your door behind you, stripping off your cloak and hanging it carefully by the hearth, you know tomorrow you'll face the same question again. What to wear, and what it says about who you are. Your stomach growls before the church bell has even tolled noon, a reminder that while the life of a middling sort may offer choices, it rarely offers quite enough food to silence hunger entirely. The truth is, in medieval England, eating isn't just about filling your belly. It's about revealing, once again, where you stand. This morning you broke your fast with a chunk of bread and some ale watered down enough to make it safe but not strong enough to slow your hands at work. That was normal. For centuries, bread has been the backbone of European diets, and you know it intimately. Sometimes too intimately. It's the chew that greets you at dawn, the ballast in your stomach through the afternoon, and the last bite you take before crawling into bed. But bread isn't one thing, it's a spectrum. At the top, wealthy tables flaunt fine white loaves made from sifted wheat flour. Soft, pale, almost a luxury cloud. At your level, you eat bread of maslin, a mix of wheat and rye, or if times are harder, barley bread. It's dense, chewy, nourishing enough, but it never lets you forget your station. And at the bottom, the poor choke down loaves thick with oats or peas, sometimes gritty with unmilled husk, sometimes stretched with whatever filler can be found. You tear off another bite from memory as you walk, recalling how bakers' guilds police not only prices but weights. Nobody wants to be caught selling a loaf too light, lest they be dragged to the pillory and pelted with rotten vegetables. The assize of bread and ale, a law going back to the 13th century, still dictates what bread costs relative to the price of grain. Historians still argue whether these regulations truly protected consumers or just gave authorities another excuse to fine bakers. Either way, when you buy bread, you glance down to judge its heft in your palm. And bread is never alone. It swims daily in company with pottage, the thick, mushy stew made from whatever's on hand. Think beans, peas, cabbage, onions, sometimes flavored with a bone if you're lucky, sometimes little more than watery greens. Today you might ladle out a bowl where barley and peas bulk up the broth, with a faint sprinkle of herbs from your small kitchen garden. It's filling enough to keep you upright, though never exciting. Yet compared to your peasant cousins in the fields, your pottage is almost generous. You can afford salt to season it, maybe even a splash of oil. Ah, salt, that glittering crystal that costs more than its weight sometimes. You keep a little stored carefully in a wooden box, bought from a merchant who hauled it from the coast. Salt preserves meat, seasons fish, and makes your table feel wealthier than it is. You treasure it as much as coin. When you do have meat, it's usually salted. Fresh meat is for feast days unless you're a hunter with access to game. Spoiler, you're not. Laws reserve deer and boar for lords. A middling household like yours might have pork now and then because pigs are cheap to raise and will eat almost anything. Mutton too is common enough, though sheep are worth more alive for their wool. Beef, rarer. Chickens, though, you keep a couple scratching in your yard. Their eggs appear more often than their flesh, since an egg a day is more profitable than one roast bird. Fish is trickier. You eat it often enough, not always by choice. Church law demands that on certain days, Fridays, Lent, vigils, you abstain from meat. For wealthier townsfolk, that means salmon, eels, or even sturgeon if they can buy it. For you, it's dried herring, salted cod, maybe freshwater fish caught from the river if the Lord hasn't locked it behind his rights. You chew it carefully, sometimes wondering if the saint who invented fasts had ever tasted stale pickled herring. Still, there are delights. Spices, for example. Oh, spices. They sail in from the Far East: pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves. They're worth their weight in silver, yet in towns like yours, a sprinkle is not impossible. Merchants carry them in tiny packets, and even middle-class kitchens keep a pinch for special occasions. When you dust a stew with pepper, you feel like a lord for a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether spices were about masking bad meat or simply about showing off. Honestly, when your tongue tingles, you don't care either way. You think of sweet flavors too. Honey is the medieval sugar, thick, golden, sticky with summer sunlight. A spoonful on bread is a rare treat. Actual sugar does exist, imported from Mediterranean plantations, but it's exotic, pricey, and more likely to end up in apothecary jars than on your table. For most of your neighbors, honey or dried fruits are as sweet as life gets. The main meal of the day comes at midday. In your home, you gather family and perhaps an apprentice or servant around a sturdy table. Wooden trenchers serve as plates, thick slices of yesterday's bread sometimes, or carved platters if you're fortunate. Spoons dip into a shared bowl. Knives cut off chunks of meat and you use your fingers more often than not. Forks, forget it. They're rare curiosities seen in Italy but mocked in England. Why stab your food twice, people ask, when once with a knife is enough? Wine flows in noble halls, but here it's ale. Brewed weak enough to hydrate, strong enough to warm, ale is safer than water and easier to come by. Households brew their own, often with women at the helm. Alewives stirring steaming cauldrons of malt, barley, and hops in later centuries. Before hops, other herbs flavored the drink. Your jug on the table carries a modest brew, cloudy but hearty. You drink, wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, and keep talking. And what are you talking about? Food, inevitably. Prices at the market. How last winter's harvest of barley was thinner than expected. How a neighbor found worms in his flour barrel. How your cousin down in the village still survives on nothing but onions and oats. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit here. Sometimes people tried outlandish remedies to stretch meals. Chronicles mention bread baked with pea flour or beans to survive shortages, though this often led to digestive fireworks, let's say. Others swore by eating ground acorns, which filled the stomach but left you feeling half like a pig rooting in the woods. Later in the evening, supper is lighter. A reheated pottage, maybe some cheese with bread. Cheese is common enough, made from leftover milk, pressed hard for storage. You gnaw on a piece, sharp on the tongue, and think about how lucky you are compared to those who have none. But every now and then you taste something glorious. Perhaps during a guild feast when long tables groan under the weight of roasted geese, pies stuffed with minced meat and fruit, custards spiced with nutmeg. You sit shoulder to shoulder with fellow tradesmen, tearing into legs, smearing grease across your lips, lifting cups of ale until your belly is drum tight. For that one night you feel almost noble. Almost. Yet excess has its dangers. The church preaches moderation, reminding everyone that gluttony is a deadly sin. Monks thunder against too much meat, too much spice, too much joy at the table. And anyway, your purse wouldn't let you feast daily even if your conscience allowed it. As the candle burns low tonight, you sit with your family by the hearth. A pot of beans simmers, bread waits to be cut, and a neighbor has dropped off a jug of fresh ale in exchange for a borrowed tool. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth of food that fills without dazzling, comforts without tempting pride. And as you chew, you realize, this is what it means to live between poverty and power. You're no peasant forced to scrape the bottom of the pot. You're no lord perfumed with saffron and sugar. You're in the middle, your meals steady, your table modest, your stomach usually filled, though never quite satisfied. Tomorrow you'll wake and bread will greet you again. The same chew, the same comfort, the same reminder. You are middling, and in this world that is both a privilege and a prison. The smell of damp wool and singed leather clings to your tunic before the sun even climbs high. Work waits, as it always does, humming like an invisible clock you can never quite silence. Being part of the medieval middle class doesn't mean lounging around on feather mattresses. It means running a workshop, training apprentices, balancing ledgers, and making sure your household eats tomorrow. In truth, your life is stitched together with long hours, blistered hands, and the constant shuffle between ambition and exhaustion. This morning you swing open the wooden shutters of your workshop and light spills across the benches. Tools wait where you left them. Chisels, awls, a hammer blackened with use, scraps of cloth or wood scattered like breadcrumbs leading through your trade. Each sound is familiar, the scrape of a blade across material, the thud of mallet on block, the clink of nails into place. This is your orchestra, and you conduct it day after day. Your trade defines you. If you're a weaver, then rows of threads stretch across a loom, colors interlacing under your hand until cloth is born from patience. If you're a cobbler, piles of leather curl at your feet, waiting to become shoes. If you're a smith, sparks leap and bite your skin, the forge roaring like a dragon you've half tamed. Whatever your craft, it keeps you steady in the eyes of neighbors and guild alike. To be middle class is to make something, and to make it well. But here, the rub, you rarely work alone. Apprentices bustle around, eager, clumsy, irritating, and indispensable all at once. That boy fumbling with a hammer in the corner. He probably paid, or rather his parents paid, a decent sum to secure his place under your roof. Apprenticeship is the great gateway to trade. For 7 years, sometimes more, sometimes less, a youth lives with you, learns your skills, eats your bread, and drives you mad with mistakes. In return, you shape him into a craftsman. At least that's the plan. The apprenticeship contract is as binding as any noble oath. Parents sign papers with the guild, ensuring their child won't flee midway or waste the opportunity. In theory, you're not just teaching skills, you're teaching morality. You discipline him like a father, you guide him like a priest. And oh, how often you mutter prayers for patience as another piece of leather is ruined or another loom thread snarled. Historians still argue whether apprentices were truly grateful for this arrangement, or if many resented the near servitude it entailed. Some accounts describe youths fleeing, hiding in neighboring towns, trying to wriggle free from their masters. But others thrived, climbing from raw boy to proud journeyman, and eventually master in their own right. You've seen both stories unfold. And speaking of journeymen, those half-trained, half-free workers, sometimes they drift through your workshop too. Paid by the day, they help during busy seasons. Unlike apprentices, they owe you no loyalty. They drink your ale, take their wages, and vanish when better work calls. You rely on them, but you don't trust them, not fully. The hours stretch long. Forget neat 9 to 5. Your workday begins with the first light creeping through the shutters and doesn't end until the streets outside fall silent. Some trades grind even longer. If you're a baker, you're up while others snore, kneading dough by candlelight so that loaves are ready when townsfolk stir. If you're a smith, you hammer until your arms ache and your ears ring. If you're a scribe, your back knots over parchment, your eyes strain at the flicker of the flame. And yet there's a rhythm to it. You fall into the cadence. Morning labor, midday meal, afternoon push, evening tidy. Tools sharpened, benches swept, goods stacked ready for sale. Sometimes neighbors poke their heads in, bargaining for a piece before it even leaves your shop. Other times merchants arrive, ordering in bulk to resell elsewhere. And once in a while, an official from the guild inspects, checking weights, measures, or quality. They nod or frown, and their judgment decides whether your reputation soars or sinks. The guild looms large. It's not just a club, it's your lifeline. Guilds regulate your trade, protect your monopoly, and demand obedience. You pay fees, attend meetings, march in processions, and abide by their rules. If your cloth is too thin or your bread too light, you risk penalties. But in return, guild membership shields you from outside competition. Outsiders can't simply wander into town and set up shop. The guild shuts them down fast. This monopoly is your invisible armor, keeping you middling instead of slipping downward. Inside your workshop, family joins the labor. Your wife, far from idle, helps manage accounts, sells goods at market, or even works the tools beside you if custom is brisk. Daughters stitch hems, sons fetch water, everyone pulls weight. The household isn't divided into work and home. The two blur together, one messy braid. The same hearth that warms your stew also dries dyed cloth. The same bench that holds tools at noon holds bread loaves cooling by dusk. A quirky tidbit: in some towns, animals even join the workshop chaos. Weavers might keep cats to chase mice from cloth. Bakers shoo chickens from flour sacks. Smiths curse dogs sniffing dangerously near sparks. Your space is alive with noise, a tangle of humans and beasts all keeping the machine running. Still, long hours breed aches. Your hands stiffen, your eyes blur, your back cracks. You stretch, mutter, and plunge back into it. There's little choice. Wealth may glitter above you, poverty yawns below. Work is the rope you cling to. But work also builds pride. Each shoe fitted snug, each cloak stitched clean, each nail driven firm is proof that you matter. Lords swing swords, peasants swing scythes, but you craft. You shape the material world, and in that shaping, you carve a place between the extremes. Of course, markets fluctuate. Some weeks customers stream in, gold clinking into your chest. Other weeks drag, the streets empty, your goods gathering dust. You lie awake on those nights, staring at the rafters, wondering if your apprentices will still have bread next month. Ambition whispers, perhaps more risk, more loans, more goods to sell. Fear answers, one failed gamble and you tumble downward. Historians still argue whether the middle-class craftsmen lived securely or precariously. The evidence points both ways. Some amassed wealth, climbing toward gentle status. Others collapsed under debt, sinking back into peasant obscurity. You know the truth firsthand. Stability is as fragile as the glass goblets carried through town, beautiful, useful, and one stumble away from shards. By late evening, your workshop quiets, tools rest, apprentices slump on pallets. Smoke drifts from the forge or the hearth. You rub your hands, sore and cracked, yet strangely satisfied. Tomorrow you'll wake and do it again. You close the shutters. Outside, the town hums with voices heading home, the smell of smoke rising as kitchens cook supper. You step into the lane, stretch your stiff back, and smile faintly. For all its long hours and endless demands, this workshop is your anchor. It keeps you steady in a world that spins wildly between the poor who starve and the rich who feast. And as you trudge home, the weight of the day pressing on your shoulders, you know this. To be middle class in medieval England is to live by your craft, to work until your bones complain, and to hope that in the end, your calloused hands leave behind something lasting. The church bell tolls before dawn, echoing over rooftops and rattling your half-slept brain. You roll over on your straw mattress, trying to decide whether the pealing feels more like a holy summons or just the medieval version of an alarm clock. Either way, it's working. You're awake, and faith is tugging at your sleeve, the same way it does every day of your life. To be middle class in medieval England isn't just about counting coins or measuring cloth. It's also about measuring your hours in prayers. The church weaves through every moment of your day, like threads in a loom. Sometimes brightly visible, sometimes faint, but always there, tugging quietly. You start simple, a quick prayer before bread, a muttered Ave Maria when passing a churchyard, a cross traced on your chest when walking past a shrine. These aren't optional flourishes, they're the wallpaper of your existence. To forget them would feel as reckless as stepping outside without shoes. By sunrise, you're already thinking about Mass. The parish church is your anchor. Stone walls rise from the mud, a squat tower visible across town, its bells regulating time better than any clock. Everyone belongs here, rich, poor, and in between, and everyone pays for the privilege. Literally. Tithes claim a tenth of your income, and you can grumble but try refusing and see how quickly the priest shows up at your door. Inside, the air is thick with incense, sunlight dripping through stained glass like liquid jewels. Your bench isn't at the front. That's for the wealthier patrons who have bought the best pews or even endowed a chapel. You sit in the middle, not shoved to the back with peasants, but not striding up front either. Middle class to the last, even in God's house. The service is long in Latin, of course. Do you understand every word? Not really. But you feel the rhythm, the rising chant, the careful movements of priests and acolytes. The mystery itself is part of the power. And when the host is lifted high, everyone hushes, every head bows. You bow too, whispering your prayer, half faith, half hope, half habit. Yes, that's three halves, but faith is like that, spilling over the edges. Historians still argue whether medieval folk were deeply devout or just following social rules. You suspect the truth is a messy blend. Sometimes you feel real awe, goosebumps rising as the choir sings. Other times your stomach growls, your knees ache, and you sneak glances at the door, wishing the service would end so you can get back to work. Sacred and mundane are always tangled. And it's not just Sundays. The calendar itself is a patchwork of holy days. Saints' feasts, fasts, vigils. You navigate them like stepping stones across the year. Some bring joy with processions, fairs, and drinking enough ale to forget the sermon. Others bring hunger like Lent, when meat vanishes from your table, and you mutter darkly over yet another salted fish. But whether you love or loathe them, these days carve your life into rhythm. At home, religion follows you too. A little cross hangs above your bed. Candles burn on feast nights. You keep a book of hours if you can afford one, its painted saints watching you with stern eyes. When storms crash overhead, you whisper psalms for safety. When illness strikes, you light candles and promise to behave better if only God spares your child. Faith is comfort, bargaining chip, and cosmic insurance policy all at once. And then there are the more dramatic moments. Confession, for example. Kneeling, muttering sins to the priest, cheeks burning with shame. You list lies, envy, laziness, that one time you kicked the cat, though maybe you don't mention the cat. The priest nods, prescribes prayers, and you leave lighter like you've emptied a backpack stuffed with bricks. Do you believe every sin is wiped clean? Some days yes, some days no. But it feels good enough to try. Pilgrimage is another great thread woven into your life. Maybe you've trudged to Canterbury, joining throngs of pilgrims with badges pinned to your cloak, all eager for a blessing at St. Thomas Becket's shrine. Maybe you've gone smaller to a local saint's well or chapel. Pilgrimage is equal parts devotion, travel, and holiday, half spiritual journey, half medieval road trip. Quirky tidbit. Some people faked pilgrimages, buying badges in town and pretending they'd traveled just to look holy. You can't help but smirk at that. Imagine fibbing about vacation photos centuries before Instagram. Of course, faith also colors how you see illness and death. You live in a world where disease strikes fast, and medicine feels more like guesswork than science. When someone falls ill, you pray to saints, burn candles, maybe even pay for a mass in their name. Healing is as much about the soul as the body. Historians still argue whether medieval folk genuinely believed every cough was punishment for sin, but you've seen enough sermons to know the idea was popular. Sometimes, though, faith isn't gentle, it's heavy. The church's rules seep into your private life. What you eat on Fridays, who you marry, whether your business contracts count without oaths sworn before God, all of it sits under church authority. And if you falter, if you push back, you risk excommunication. That word is terrifying. It means no mass, no sacraments, no salvation. You be cut off like a branch from a tree withering alone. So you comply, even when you grumble. Your guild also folds religion into its structure. Meetings begin with prayers. Saints serve as patrons. St. Crispin for shoemakers, St. Eloi for smiths, St. Luke for painters. You march in processions carrying banners with their images, half proud craftsman, half holy devotee. The line between professional and spiritual is as thin as parchment. Even leisure is touched by faith. Mystery plays performed in the town square dramatize biblical stories, with townsfolk acting out Noah, Moses, or Christ himself. You laugh at the comic devils with their tails wagging, but you also feel the weight of the passion when the actor playing Jesus staggers under the cross. Entertainment and devotion blur until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. And yet doubts creep in. You hear murmurs of corruption, priests with mistresses, bishops living like lords, pardoners hawking indulgences like street vendors. You roll your eyes but still drop a coin in the collection box, because what choice do you have? Historians still argue how deeply ordinary people questioned the church before the Reformation, but sitting in your pew, you feel both loyalty and frustration. By evening, as you kneel by your hearth, whispering one last prayer before sleep, you realize faith isn't something you put on like a cloak. It's more like the air, sometimes stifling, sometimes refreshing, always there. It dictates your festivals, your meals, your contracts, your guilt, your comfort. You may grumble, you may smirk, you may even sneak the occasional shortcut, but you never escape it. And as the church bell tolls again, fading into the night, you murmur the words half out of devotion, half out of habit. Either way, they shape your world. Ale splashes from the barrel, drums thud in the square, and for once you don't care about the tally of your accounts or the aching soles of your feet. You're here for the festival. Life in medieval England might look all mud and toil from a distance, but tucked between the endless chores are days that erupt like fireworks. Festivals, games, stolen moments of laughter, they're the sugar sprinkled over the porridge of existence. You live in a world without weekends as you know them. Sure, Sunday is technically a day of rest, but rest in medieval terms often means working half as hard instead of not at all. That's why feast days matter. They break the monotony with processions, music, and the delicious excuse to eat and drink more than usual. Picture it, banners flutter from church towers, stalls pop up in the square, and suddenly your familiar town feels transformed. A saint's feast or a guild celebration pulls everyone into the streets. Children dart between booths selling candied nuts, women carry jugs of spiced wine, and the smell of roasting meat hangs heavy in the air. You bite into a chunk of glazed goose, grease slicking your fingers, and for a moment you forget entirely about work, taxes, or the bishop's last sermon. One mainstream fact: medieval England observed more than 90 feast days each year, plus Sundays. That's nearly 1/3 of the calendar marked by some form of break from routine. Of course, not all were joyous blowouts, some were solemn fasts, but enough were festive to keep spirits buoyant. And if the church calendar doesn't provide enough, your guild adds its own flavor. Charter Day, for example, when your town celebrates the granting of its rights, might involve a parade of guild members in their finest robes, carrying banners stitched with saints. You strut alongside fellow merchants, trying to look solemn but sneaking grins at the children chasing after the musicians. Of course, not all merriment is officially sanctioned. Sometimes you and your neighbors invent your own excuses for fun. May Day is a perfect example. Before dawn, villagers and townsfolk trek into the woods to gather greenery. You carry branches back, weave garlands, and crown a May Queen. Some call it pagan at heart, the church frowns and shrugs, but you just enjoy the dancing. Around the maypole you go, ribbons twinning in dizzying colors, the air buzzing with flirtation as much as music. Historians still argue whether May Day carried deep fertility symbolism or was simply an excuse for drinking and dancing. You suspect both are true, especially when you notice who sneaks off into the woods before the garlands are finished. But festivals aren't just for dancing, they're arenas for games. Wrestling matches, archery contests, quarterstaff duels, the kind of rough sport that makes you cheer, laugh, and maybe win a few wagers. You grip a wooden mug of ale and shout yourself hoarse as two men grapple in the dust, each determined to throw the other flat on his back. The crowd roars when one finally goes down, and you pocket a coin from your lucky bet. Archery is especially popular, thanks to royal decrees requiring practice. Every man is supposed to train, and competitions spring up naturally. You string your bow, nock an arrow, and squint at the distant target. The release twangs in your fingers, the arrow hums through the air, and well, let's just say you hit somewhere in the vicinity. Not the bullseye, but close enough to keep your dignity intact. And then there's football. Not the neat game with tidy pitches and referees, oh no. Medieval football is chaos. Whole neighborhoods clash, chasing a ball through fields, streets, and even rivers. The goals are vague, the rules vaguer, and the bruises spectacular. You join in once, dodging elbows, laughing until your lungs burn, and afterward you limp home, swearing never again until next year. Quirky tidbit. Some towns had to ban football outright because it was so rowdy, smashing windows, breaking legs, and occasionally killing unlucky bystanders. Imagine explaining to your priest that you missed Mass because you were flattened under 50 neighbors chasing a leather ball. But not all leisure is so raucous. Sometimes it's quieter, stolen in snatches between work. A dice game with friends in a tavern corner. A round of backgammon, known as tables, with pebbles and a board scratched into wood. You roll, curse, laugh, and sometimes suspect the dice aren't entirely fair. Cards haven't yet swept England, but gambling with bones or coins keeps things lively enough. And don't forget music. Wandering minstrels drift through town with fiddles, harps, or bagpipes. You toss them a penny and let their songs lift your spirits. Maybe you join in singing, your voice rough but enthusiastic. Ballads of Robin Hood, tales of chivalry, cheeky love songs. They weave through the crowd, reminding you that storytelling isn't confined to parchment. Your children, meanwhile, make their own fun. They chase hoops, play with rag dolls, or gather in muddy alleys for games of tag. You chuckle as they argue about rules, some things never change. And in quieter evenings, you sit by the fire, telling them stories of saints, dragons, or Arthurian knights. Their eyes widen, their questions spill, and you feel the strange comfort of passing time through tales. But leisure isn't only about games and festivals. It's about meals stretched longer, laughter shared louder. Picture a wedding feast. Long trestle tables sag under trenchers of meat and bowls of pottage. You raise a cup of ale as musicians play, dancers whirl, and the smell of roasted boar fills the hall. Children sneak extra honey cakes, dogs bark underfoot, and somewhere in the corner two men argue loudly about who's had more to drink. For a moment, you're not just surviving, you're reveling. Even funerals carry their own kind of communal leisure. Somber, yes, but also occasions for feasting, drinking, and storytelling. After all, what better way to honor the dead than to eat, drink, and share memories until the candle stubs burn low? It's a reminder that even sorrowful gatherings fold back into the rhythm of shared food and company. The truth is, leisure in medieval England isn't about long vacations or spa days. It's about puncturing the hard crust of labor with bursts of joy. Festivals, games, drinking bouts, storytelling, all woven into your life like bright threads among the gray. You lean back against the tavern wall, mug in hand, listening to the laughter and songs swirling around you. Tomorrow, you'll be back to haggling prices, hauling goods, and paying taxes. But tonight, under lantern light, with ale warm in your belly and music tickling your ears, you feel alive. Historians still argue whether medieval folk were merry by nature or simply desperate to snatch joy where they could. Standing in the crowd, watching the maypole ribbons flutter, you don't much care. You just know this. Without these stolen moments, life would feel unbearably long. With them, it feels human. And as the bonfire crackles, sparks swirling into the starry sky, you take another sip, laugh at another bawdy joke, and let the night carry you. The morning bells toll again, and as you step outside, you notice something you can never quite ignore. The way men and women move through the same town but along very different tracks. It's not written on a signpost, yet it's everywhere, from who speaks first at the market stall to who takes up the broom in the workshop. You live in a world where gender shapes everything. What you can do, how you're judged, even whether your name gets remembered in the town records. Let's be clear. In medieval England, the law bends in one direction. Men inherit titles, sign contracts, vote in guild councils. Women, legally, are often folded into the identity of their husbands. A married woman is considered feme covert, literally covered by her husband's legal status. It means you can't own property outright, can't sue in court, can't even always control your own wages. But here's the twist. The rules of life are messier than the rules of parchment. Step into the kitchen of a merchant's household or the back room of a weaver's shop, and you'll find women running entire operations, their labor as vital as any man. Imagine you're watching a cloth merchant's wife in the middle of her day. Her husband is away in another town, negotiating a wool shipment, but the shop doors still creak open each morning. She tallies cloth bolts, negotiates with customers, haggles over prices, and records sales in neat script. Legally, her husband might be the merchant, but practically she is. Many surviving account books are written in women's hands, a quiet fingerprint of their presence in the economy. Historians still argue whether this made women business partners in spirit or simply stand-ins under male authority. Either way, the evidence is there. Without women, the middle-class dream of steady trade collapses. Step into another lane. You see daughters carrying baskets of spun yarn to dyers, mothers teaching sons their letters, wives brewing ale in backyards. Ale brewing, in fact, is so often a female trade in medieval towns that the term alewife becomes common, sometimes flattering, sometimes mocking. Picture her stirring a bubbling vat, sweat on her brow, shouting at her children not to trip over the firewood. She sells by the jug to neighbors, supplementing her family's income. Some alewives become prosperous. Others are dragged before court for selling weak or watered beer. You can almost hear the muttered complaint, "That's not strong enough to drown a flea." Now, if you're a man, you might chuckle at these stories in the tavern, but you know deep down that your wife's brewing paid for the shoes on your children's feet. Then there's marriage itself, the grand stage where gender roles are most sharply played. Forget romantic novels for a moment. Marriage is often an alliance, negotiated as carefully as any trade contract. Families bargain over dowries, property, and social standing. You might be fond of your spouse, or you might simply tolerate each other. Love is nice if it comes, but not essential. A wife's duty is to manage the household, bear children, and uphold family honor. A husband's duty is to provide, protect, and maintain authority. That sounds tidy on parchment, but again, life rarely stays inside the lines. You know couples who clearly adore each other, laughing together over supper, holding hands at church. You also know couples where the husband drinks too much, the wife sighs too loudly, and the children tiptoe around arguments. Real life never matches the sermon. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, if a husband and wife quarreled publicly, neighbors might stage a mock charivari, banging pots and pans outside their door to shame them into behaving. Imagine trying to sleep while the whole street clatters at your window, chanting about your domestic drama. Talk about community pressure. And while we're on uncomfortable truths, childbirth. For women, it's the ever-present shadow. No modern medicine, no anesthesia, no antiseptic tools. You pray to St. Margaret, patron of childbirth, clutch relics, and hope the midwife knows her craft. Sometimes mother and child thrive. Sometimes both are lost. Everyone in your town knows someone who has died in childbirth, and it colors how you see marriage. The risk is not hidden, it's simply lived with. And yet, despite this burden, women carve power where they can. Picture the lady of the guild feast, dressed in her best gown, jewels catching the candlelight. Her husband may hold the guild's title, but her presence signals status. She arranges marriages, builds networks, dispenses charity. Behind the curtain of male-dominated councils, women stitch alliances every bit as vital. Historians still argue whether women's influence was informal, or whether we should see it as genuine authority. But as you watch a merchant's widow successfully petition town leaders to let her continue running her late husband's workshop, you wonder if it matters. Influence, in any form, is real when it changes lives. Now let's talk expectations. Men are expected to be steady providers, but also to embody a kind of controlled toughness. Too gentle and you're mocked, too cruel and you're distrusted. Women are expected to be obedient, pious, and industrious. Too bold and you're labeled shrewish. Too idle and you're shamed as wasteful. In between, of course, lies the real human spectrum. Men who cry at funerals, women who outbargain any merchant, couples who swap duties without blinking. There's a kind of dance here. Gender roles are choreographed, but each person improvises within them. You know widows who rise to head households, single men who fail to provide, daughters who become more skilled at accounts than their brothers, wives who practically run entire trade empires while their husbands fade into the background. And just like any dance, sometimes it stumbles. Consider the scold's bridle, a cruel iron contraption designed to punish women accused of nagging or gossiping. It's locked over the head with a bit pressing into the mouth. Public humiliation is the point. Not every town uses it, but the very existence reminds you. Step too far outside the dance, and society's hand will push you back. Yet there are stories of resistance. Ballads celebrate clever wives outwitting foolish husbands, tales passed around with a wink. You hear jokes about who really rules the household, and while officially the answer is always the man, laughter sometimes suggests otherwise. Children, too, feel the weight of roles early. Sons are taught trades, expected to carry family names forward. Daughters learn domestic crafts, with futures tied to marriage contracts. Still, girls play games in the street, boys sing songs while spinning wool. It's not all preordained. For a few years of childhood, at least, the dance pauses and life is just play. As you sip ale at a festival, watching couples dance in the square, you see these roles play out like theater. Men lead, women follow, but sometimes you catch a sly reversal, her tugging him into a spin, his mock stumble making the crowd laugh. Even within the strict patterns, there's room for humor, subversion, humanity. So what's the reality of gender in your medieval middle-class world? It's not black and white. It's not simply oppression or equality. It's a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, always shaped by the expectations of your time but never wholly defined by them. And as the music fades, you wonder if future historians will argue endlessly about whether your life was free or bound, equal or constrained. Maybe they'll never quite know. But you, living it, know this. You make do, you adapt, and sometimes, just sometimes, you lead the dance yourself. The clink of coins has a way of echoing louder in your ears than the toll of church bells. Maybe it's because you don't hear it often enough, or maybe because every sound of silver dropping into your palm feels like possibility. You're middle class now, a merchant or craftsman with your name on the guild rolls, but that doesn't mean you're swimming in gold. It means you know the constant dance of credit, debt, and the danger lurking in between. You stride through the marketplace, purse tied carefully at your belt, hand always brushing against it like a nervous tick. One wrong bump and some light-fingered boy might snatch your week's earnings before you even realize. That purse might carry pennies, groats, and if you're lucky, a noble or two. Money in medieval England is weighty, literally. Coins are chunks of precious metal, their value tied to silver content. No paper bills yet, no neat plastic cards. Just clinking discs that leave your belt sore by the end of the day. But here's the tricky part. Life costs more than coins can easily cover. Even in a bustling town, coinage is scarce. So how do you trade a cart of wool for a shipment of wine, or pay your apprentice when your purse is light? That's where credit steps in. Those invisible threads of trust and obligation that bind the middle class together even more tightly than guild oaths. A fellow merchant sells you cloth on credit, expecting you'll pay once your next sale is made. You nod, shake hands, and maybe mutter a little prayer to St. Matthew, patron saint of accountants, that business goes well enough for you to settle the debt. Because if you do, you risk more than embarrassment, you risk ruin. Historians still argue whether medieval towns ran primarily on cash or credit. The evidence suggests a messy hybrid. Coins handled the small, everyday stuff, bread, ale, candles. But for larger deals, credit was the grease in the gears. People kept mental tallies, scratched marks on tallies of wood, or jotted accounts in ledgers. Some even relied on memory alone. Imagine owing 3 different men for 3 different shipments and having no spreadsheet to track it all. No wonder medieval headaches were real. Here's a quirky tidbit. Those wooden tally sticks weren't just a gimmick. They were official tools, split lengthwise with notches to represent amounts owed. One half went to the creditor, the other to the debtor, and only the 2 matched halves could prove the debt. England's exchequer even used them for royal accounts until, wait for it, the 19th century. So yes, while everyone was fussing with quills and parchment, a good chunk of the kingdom's finances rested on what looks like oversized popsicle sticks. But let's not pretend credit is safe. You've seen neighbors ruined when they stretch too far. A bad harvest, a shipment lost to pirates, or simply too many customers forgetting to pay, and suddenly your accounts tumble like a badly built scaffolding. Debt collectors are not the polite bank emails of your world. They are burly men at your door, guild fines, or lawsuits dragging you into the town court. In worse cases, debt could land you in prison, sitting in a damp cell while your family pleads with neighbors to raise funds for your release. Imagine stewing in straw, thinking over every foolish coin you ever lent. And yet the danger doesn't stop you or anyone from taking the risk, because without borrowing and lending, business stalls. Want to expand your shop, hire more apprentices, or buy better stock? You'll need to borrow. Want to climb from journeyman to master? That costs money, tools, workshop, guild fees. And for that, you'll probably take out a loan from family, a fellow guildsman, or if you're daring, from a moneylender. Ah, moneylenders. That word probably made your ears prick. In your world, lending at interest, called usury, is condemned by the church. Officially, Christians aren't supposed to charge interest at all, because money, unlike a cow or a cart, doesn't breed naturally. To make money off money is seen as unnatural, even sinful. But, and here comes the wink, everybody still does it. Just under the table with polite euphemisms like fees or gifts tacked onto loans. And where Christians hesitate, others step in. In many towns, Jewish moneylenders handle the loans most Christians can't officially give. They fill an essential economic role, but it makes them targets of resentment. You know of a neighbor who borrowed from a Jewish lender to repair his workshop, only to curse him loudly when repayment came due. The prejudice grows dangerous, especially during times of crisis, when debts and stereotypes mix into a toxic brew. You hear whispers of expulsions, of pogroms, and you feel unease. Because while borrowing may keep your business afloat, it also binds you into a web of power and vulnerability you can't easily cut. And sometimes, the lender isn't a stranger at all, it's your own guild. Guilds collect dues and fines, and with their pooled funds, they lend to members in need. It's safer, in a way, but also riskier for your pride. Owe too much to your own brothers, and you'll feel their scorn at every meeting. One sharp-tongued guild elder reminding everyone of your debt at the feast can sting more than a missed payment itself. To sweeten the mood, let's glance at one of those quirky loopholes, pawnbroking. If you're strapped for cash, you can pledge a valuable item, a cloak, a tool, even a cooking pot as collateral for a loan. Fail to repay and the item is forfeit. You once saw a man march to the market wearing only his undertunic because his cloak was pawned. He muttered something about investing in his business, but the laughter behind him told another story. So what happens when you're the one lending? That's a different flavor of danger. A neighbor borrows 2 shillings, swearing on his saint's medal he'll repay by Michaelmas. Michaelmas arrives, and suddenly he avoids you, ducking down alleys, coughing about his poor luck. Do you press him hard and risk souring relations, or wait and risk losing the money entirely? In a close-knit town, these decisions ripple. Push too hard and you're the villain. Let it slide and you're the fool. It's a delicate balance of friendship, pride, and survival. You can feel the strain in your own bones. Every transaction carries risk. A promise is only as good as the man giving it, and there's no insurance office ready to cover your losses if a cart of wool drowns in the river. You rely on reputation, yours and others. If people say you're trustworthy, you'll get credit. If whispers suggest you're shaky, doors slam. It's less about contracts than about faces, whether yours inspires confidence or doubt. And of course, there's always the shadow of crime. Counterfeiters clip coins, scraping off silver edges until they're lighter than they should be. Fraudsters sell bad goods on credit and skip town. Sometimes, even respected merchants inflate debts in records, counting on illiterate clients not to notice. Town courts are filled with these disputes. Who owes what, who lied, who's ruined. The very system of credit that fuels your prosperity is also a minefield. Here, where historians love to debate, did the risks of medieval credit stunt the economy, or did they actually teach people the financial flexibility that later fueled capitalism? Some say the constant dance of lending and borrowing hardened merchants into savvy risk-takers. Others say it kept everyone trapped in cycles of obligation, unable to expand too far. You, standing with your tally stick and your aching purse, don't much care about future capitalism. You just want to keep your family fed without ending up in debtor's prison. Still, you can't deny the thrill. When a deal goes right, when your borrowed money multiplies into profit, you feel untouchable. You pay your lender, tip your hat, and walk a little taller. That's the danger. The sweet taste of success makes you forget how close the cliff edge really is. So you live carefully. You hide coins in the hearth, stitched into cloaks or buried in pots under the floorboards. You lend only to those you trust, borrow only when you must, and pray the saints keep your accounts balanced. And as you sit by candlelight, tally stick in hand, scratching figures onto parchment, you feel the weight of it all. Credit, debt, danger, they're not abstract. They're the fabric of your life. Every coin is a promise, every promise a risk. And in the end, you're not just a craftsman or merchant. You're a tightrope walker, balancing above the abyss, praying the rope holds another day. The world may run on coin and credit, but ink is another kind of power. Not silver, not gold, but words scratched, copied, whispered, memorized. And for you, a middling townsman with aspirations beyond your father's workshop, those words can open doors, or at least windows, into realms once reserved for clerics and nobles. Education in the Middle Ages isn't universal, far from it. Many men and most women live and die without writing a single letter. But in your town, where merchants count coins and guilds keep statutes, learning to read and reckon is no longer a luxury. It is survival. If you can't tally, you'll be cheated. If you can't read a contract, you'll sign away your rights before you know what happened. So when you send your son to school, or maybe sneak a few lessons for yourself after hours, it's not just ambition, it's armor. Picture the grammar school, a drafty room beside the church, boys perched on hard benches, the smell of wax and ink heavy in the air. The schoolmaster, usually a low-ranking cleric, wields both a rod and a voice sharp enough to make ears ring. His lessons are simple, repetitive, and merciless. First the alphabet, then syllables, then Latin prayers. Always Latin, because Latin is the language of the church, of law, of record. You might want your child to learn to read accounts in English or French, but the path to literacy starts with Ave Maria. It's a slow climb. The boys chant, recite, copy, repeat. Errors earn sharp raps on the knuckles, but progress comes. Within a year or two, a boy can stumble through the Psalms. Within a decade, if luck and coin hold, he can parse Virgil or Cicero. Few will get that far, most leave after learning enough to count and sign their names. But even that little can change a life. And here, where the hunger begins. Once a man can read, he starts to crave. A guildsman leafs through his guild's ordinances with pride. A merchant pores over letters from abroad, savoring every exotic place name. A curious wife, listening in the workshop, asks her husband to read aloud from a saint's life or a ballad. She may not be allowed in the schoolroom, but she can learn by ear, piecing together letters when she catches sight of them. Books, though, books. They are treasures, not yet cheap, not yet common. Each one is a labor of weeks, even months, copied by hand on parchment. The cost of vellum alone can rival a craftsman's yearly wage. That's why most families never own more than a psalter, maybe a book of hours if they're especially devout or prosperous. These little prayer books become heirlooms passed down, thumbed to softness. But in your century, something stirs, the press. Gutenberg's new contraption has begun to scatter printed books across Europe like seeds. They are still rare in your town, still dear, but rumors spread. A neighbor claims to have seen a printed Bible, its letters sharp, identical, almost magical in their precision. A traveler swears he bought a book of romances for a price no scribe could match. You listen, heart quickening, and wonder if the day will come when you can afford a library, not just a single volume. Even before printing, towns like yours develop book culture in surprising ways. Guilds commission chronicles. Town councils hire clerks to copy statutes. Traveling chapmen hawk cheap pamphlets or hand-copied ballads. And then there are the songs, rhymed tales of Robin Hood, Arthur, or Troy, sung in the tavern until words lodge in your memory. Literacy is a ladder, but even those at the bottom catch glimpses of the climb. Let's step back into your schoolroom, though, because education is not just about reading words, it's about reckoning numbers. And numbers to a merchant matter even more. The abacus schools of Italy become legendary, teaching boys how to calculate profit, interest, exchange rates. In England or France, lessons are simpler but still crucial. Roman numerals are standard, though maddening for long sums. Arabic numerals, with their neat place values and sly zero, are slowly making their way into use, though many distrust them as foreign tricks. Imagine learning that 37 times 14 equals 518 in minutes with Hindu-Arabic symbols, while your neighbor still scratches laborious lines of XS and Vs. That's the power of learning curves. Yet not everyone cheers this tide of literacy. Some elders mutter that too much reading softens a man, makes him question, distracts him from work. Some priests fret that laymen with books might twist scripture without guidance. Knowledge, after all, is power, and power makes authorities nervous. But the hunger is hard to stop. You feel it when you borrow a psalter and stumble through its Latin, half prayer, half puzzle. You feel it when a traveling scholar stops in town and dazzles the tavern with Aristotelian quips. You feel it when your child asks what lies beyond the horizon, and you realize you have no book to show him. That gnawing hunger for more words, more learning, more keys to unlock the world. Of course, schools are not just about knowledge. They are about discipline, manners, and connections. A boy who survives grammar school learns obedience, endurance, and how to jostle among peers. A clever one might win a place at university, a rare leap from middling roots into the clerical elite. Oxford, Paris, Bologna, names that glow with promise. Few make it, but every guild knows a tale of a craftsman's son who rose high through books. Those tales keep parents scraping coins for tuition, dreaming their children might leap beyond their station. And it's not only sons. Women's education is limited, yes, but not absent. Nuns in convents learn to read Latin. Some wealthy townswomen read French romances or devotional texts. Wives of merchants sometimes handle accounts, balancing ledgers when husbands are away. You've heard of women running bookshops, even copying texts themselves. For every stern voice saying, "Women need no letters," there's a quiet example proving otherwise. Knowledge hunger also sparks other forms of learning. Craft guilds guard secrets of dyeing, weaving, metalwork, passing them from master to apprentice like sacred lore. Recipes, techniques, patterns, all part of an education outside parchment. Your neighbor the mason knows geometry better than most clerks, though he's never written the word. The brewer's wife can tell the difference between herbs at a sniff, though no herbal text sits on her shelf. In truth, education in your world is layered, bookish learning for some, embodied knowledge for others, and often both together. And let's not forget entertainment. Minstrels bring stories, moral or bawdy, and you soak them up. Mystery plays act out biblical tales in the town square, turning scripture into spectacle. Children learn their first theology by watching devils in red paint chase souls across stage planks. It is learning, of a sort learning through laughter, fear, and awe. The hunger grows sharper when you hear whispers of forbidden books. Heretical tracts, mystical writings, even medical manuals sometimes circulate under cloaks. Possessing them can mean trouble, but curiosity is strong. What did Wycliffe really say? What secrets do Arabic physicians know? Could alchemy truly lead to gold? You may never see such texts, but the idea that they exist gnaws at you, suggesting a whole universe of knowledge just out of reach. Scholars debate whether the educational revolution of the Middle Ages was exaggerated, whether literacy rates really rose, whether the middle class truly craved books. But the evidence is there. Whilst mentioning psalters, town records filled with signatures instead of marks, account books bristling with numbers. You don't need a statistic to know it's real. You feel it when you grip a quill, hands shaking, and manage to scratch your name for the first time. That single act, a name written by your own hand, is liberation. No priest or clerk needs to stand between you and your own identity. You've left a mark that is yours, undeniable, preserved. It may not be Cicero, but it is something, and it feeds that growing hunger. So you chase learning where you can. A borrowed book, a whispered lesson, a merchant's account book, a play in the square. Knowledge is scattered, uneven, expensive, but you gather it like crumbs, hopping for a feast someday. Because deep down, you know, in a world of shifting coin, dangerous credit, and fragile health, knowledge might be the one treasure no thief can steal. And so, when the candle gutters low and you trace letters in the wax drippings on your table, you feel that quiet fire inside. A learning curve, yes, steep, slow, grueling. But hunger pushes you on. And in that hunger, you are not alone. A whole class of townsfolk, middling and striving, reach for words and numbers like pilgrims for relics, certain that salvation, or at least survival, lies within. The town walls are comforting, aren't they? Stone gates, market bells, guild halls, your world is here, safe and familiar. But sometimes comfort won't do. You need wool from the next county, spices from the port, or maybe just a pilgrimage badge to show your neighbors that you've touched a saint's relic. And that means stepping onto the road. The medieval road. Now don't imagine smooth Roman highways lined with milestones. Those are long gone or left in ruin, more memory than reality. What you face are dirt tracks, rutted with cartwheels, baked hard in summer, drowned in mud come autumn. Bridges, rare, ferries, unreliable. Half the time, you splash straight through the ford and hope your mule doesn't stumble. And don't even think about traveling at night unless you have a death wish. But you go anyway, because in this middling life, mobility is opportunity. Stay inside your timbered house forever and you'll never see beyond your stall. Step out, and the road can bring trade, news, friendships, or even a whiff of adventure. You pack carefully, a cloak against rain, a pouch of coins hidden close, not so heavy it makes you a target, not so light you go hungry. Maybe a dagger, though you're not really sure you know how to use it if pressed. You carry bread, hard cheese, and that eternal traveler's companion, ale in a flask, because the water is never trustworthy. If you're smart, you tuck a small token of protection too, a saint's medal, a sprig of herbs, something that makes you believe the road will spare you. The first stretch feels fine. Fields, hedges, peasants waving as they weed the furrows. Children chase you for pennies. But then the path narrows, the woods close in, and you remember the stories. Robbers in the undergrowth, wolves in the distance, toll keepers who invent fees on the spot. Ah yes, tolls. Every bridge, every market town, every lord's boundary is a chance for someone to stick out a hand. A penny to pass, the guard insists, his halberd shining just enough to convince you not to argue. Sometimes the toll is written down, official, with a seal you can admire. Other times it's just a man with a weapon and a grin. Historians still argue whether medieval toll systems were a genuine support for infrastructure or just legalized extortion. But you, out on the road, aren't interested in theory. You just pay up and keep walking. When night falls, you seek shelter. If you're lucky, a small inn appears near the road. Don't picture a cozy tavern with private rooms and roaring fires. More likely, it's one smoky common room, straw on the floor, and everyone from merchants to wandering friars crammed side by side. You spread your cloak, guard your pouch, and hope no one snores too loudly. The innkeeper's ale is weak, the stew thin, but at least it's hot. And the gossip. Inns are medieval news hubs. Travelers swap tales of distant fares, prices of wool, rumors of war, or sightings of strange creatures. One man swears he saw a dragon near the coast, you laugh, but take mental note just in case. Another insists the king is raising taxes again. A third, drunk already, mutters about saints' bones that cure blindness. Who knows what's true? You sip your ale, ears open, because sometimes gossip is more valuable than coin. Not every night brings an inn, of course. Sometimes it's a barn if a farmer is generous. Sometimes it's a church porch where stone carvings keep you company. Sometimes it's just the roadside, your cloak pulled tight, the stars cold above you. Quirky tidbit, many travelers carried a wax tablet and stylus, not for letters but to jot quick accounts or make sketches of where they stopped, though most of those records, sadly, never survived. Imagine the doodles. The risks are real. Bandits haunt the lonely stretches. Wolves still roam in parts of Europe, their howls unsettling even seasoned riders. Floods wash out bridges. If you fall ill on the road, good luck, and herbalist might help if you stumble into a village, but often you just limp on. The medieval proverb runs, "Traveler, pray once for your soul and twice for your shoes." You believe it by the second day. But there is wonder too. The sight of a grand castle rising on a hill, banners streaming. The moment you crest a ridge and see a new town, its spire gleaming in the sun. The taste of foreign wares at a roadside fair, candied almonds, bright cloth, strange music played by a foreigner's lute. Travel is hardship, but it is also a doorway. Pilgrimage is one excuse. Plenty of middling folk take to the road for holy purposes. Canterbury, Santiago, Rome, all magnets for the faithful. But let's be honest, pilgrimage is also social. You meet companions, share food, trade jokes. Some even treat it as a holiday, a break from the grind of daily work. You buy a badge at the shrine, pin it to your cloak, and everyone at home nods with respect. Whether your prayers were answered is between you and God, but the badge proves you went. Merchants, of course, are the lifeblood of the road. You might join a caravan of wool traders, their carts groaning with bales. Safety in numbers, they say, though it also makes you a bigger target. You walk alongside, talking prices, routes, and politics. This is where you realize how connected your little life is to the great web of kingdoms and markets. That cloth from Flanders, that spice from Venice, that rumor from Constantinople, all carried by feet on roads just like this one. Scholars debate how safe travel really was. Some argue the roads were no more dangerous than ours today, with stories of bandits exaggerated. Others say every forest was a death trap. The truth is probably in between. You, stumbling along, don't know the statistics. You only know the prickle on your neck when the trees go quiet, and how fast your heart beats until you reach the next clearing. One thing is certain, travel changes you. After a week, your boots are ruined, your legs ache, and your patience is thin. But you've seen new faces, heard new accents, maybe even picked up a phrase or two in another tongue. You return home with stories to tell, stories that make you sound just a little wiser, a little broader than your neighbor who never left. And in a world where status is half perception, that matters. So you keep going back to the road. Maybe for trade, maybe for devotion, maybe just for the thrill of seeing something new. Each time you promise yourself you'll never endure those blisters again. Each time when the chance comes, you lace your boots anyway. Because in this middle ground between poverty and power, travel is both risk and reward. And besides, who wants to be the fool at the inn with nothing to contribute when the gossip starts flowing? Wealth is a slippery thing in your world. One day you're counting coins at the guild hall, puffing your chest with pride. The next, you're eyeing your neighbor's new cloak and wondering how on earth he could afford such dyed fabric when last year he couldn't even patch his roof. In the medieval middle class, wealth doesn't just keep you warm, it keeps you visible. And visibility is both power and peril. Your own household, by town standards, is modestly comfortable. You have a second room in your timbered house. Not everyone can claim that. A servant girl comes twice a week to help fetch water and sweep, which makes you feel like a proper somebody, even if she eats half the bread while she's at it. Your clothes are respectable. Good wool, clean linen, perhaps a splash of colored trim. Nothing too bold, of course. The sumptuary laws keep reminding you that certain furs, silks, or too many fancy buttons are for nobles only. Still, it's enough to set you apart from the poorest, and in a society obsessed with appearances, that difference matters. And yet, the more comfortable you grow, the more eyes notice. A neighbor might grumble that you're growing too proud. A cousin still working the fields might mutter that you've forgotten your roots. Even fellow guildsmen sometimes whisper that your profits look suspiciously high this year. Envy seeps into cracks like damp in timber. You catch it in glances, half-snarled compliments, and rumors drifting through the market. Let's be clear, envy is practically a communal pastime. If someone buys a bigger house, the street gossips. If someone's wife turns up at church in a brighter gown, whispers spread. The line between respect and resentment is thin. Too poor and you're pitied or dismissed. Too rich and you're suspected or disliked. In the middle, you balance like a tightrope walker, trying not to fall into either pit. One of the strangest things about wealth in your time is how fragile it is. A good harvest, a lucky shipment, or a profitable fair can make a family feel secure for a season. But one fire, one illness, one lost cargo at sea, and you're suddenly scraping again. There's no bank to insure you, no welfare system to catch you. So while you might envy your neighbor's new painted shutters, you also know he could be bankrupt next winter. Still, that doesn't stop the showing off. Prosperous townsfolk invest in small luxuries that signal their status. A painted chest, a brass candlestick, a glazed jug from the potter. Wealth is meant to be seen. If it isn't visible, it barely counts. The church is the best stage for this. Families parade their Sunday best, sponsor candles, or donate stained glass windows. Even the seating can become a battleground. Who gets the front pews? Who pays for the new altar cloth? Who dares commission their own family crest carved into the choir stalls? If you think pew disputes sound petty, well, historians still argue whether parish quarrels over seating caused more tension than local taxes. You can almost believe it when you feel the heat of your neighbor's glare as you slide into a slightly more prominent bench. And then there are the dinners. Invitations are currency. A middling merchant family hosts a feast not just to eat but to be seen. A roast, some spiced wine, maybe a hired minstrel, all carefully arranged to whisper, "We are thriving." You attend one of these dinners, nibbling your pottage and nodding at the host's new tapestry. It's not exactly Versailles, but in a world of bare walls and straw floors, even a woven scene of hunting dogs is a social bombshell. But envy doesn't stop at neighbors. It climbs upwards too. You glance at the manor on the hill, the lord's hawks, the lady's silks, and feel a twinge. You may have more cash on hand than the local knight, but he has lineage, privilege, and a title you'll never buy. He can wear what he wants, ride where he wants, demand labor from peasants, and even charge tolls on the road you just trudged. Your wealth may buy a new cloak, but it won't buy his place at the king's table. That gnaws at you, especially when he treats you as just another townsman, no matter how thick your purse is. And downward envy flows too. The poor eye you with suspicion, sometimes outright resentment. A beggar at the church door curses under his breath when you pass. An apprentice mutters about masters who keep all the profit. A distant cousin writes begging letters, reminding you that while you buy pewter plates, his children go hungry. Charity is expected, coins in the alms box, bread for the needy at Christmas, but it never feels like enough to silence the murmurs. You can't shake the sense that wealth makes you a target, from above, from below, from both sides. Quirky tidbit here. In some towns, regulations literally banned middle-class families from painting their houses too brightly because neighbors complained it stirred envy and unrest. Imagine living in a world where your wall color could spark civic tension. Then again, perhaps our modern HOA rules aren't so different. This constant negotiation of wealth and envy breeds unease. You walk the streets never quite sure who resents you, who admires you, and who secretly plots to outdo you. Friendships are tangled with rivalry. Neighbors exchange help and gossip in equal measure. The very closeness of town life, houses pressed together, voices carrying through thin walls, makes privacy impossible. Everyone knows who just bought a new chest, whose daughter is betrothed to a richer family, whose apprentice left for a better master. And yet, despite the tension, you cling to this middling ground, because poverty is worse. You've seen the desperation of laborers who break their backs for pennies. You've seen beggars blind from disease, children scrawny from hunger. You never want to slip down that slope. So you guard your coins, polish your pewter, and hope your neighbors envy you just enough to respect you, but not enough to hate you. Scholars still debate whether this medieval middle class truly felt class consciousness as we understand it today. Did they see themselves as a distinct group between peasants and nobles, or just as fortunate individuals? Evidence points both ways. Guild charters suggest solidarity, while letters show plenty of backbiting. The debate doesn't matter much to you, trudging through town with a half-envied, half-suspected air. What matters is survival, and keeping your balance on that tightrope of wealth and envy. So tonight, when you bar your timbered door and glance around your modestly prosperous room, you feel both pride and unease. Pride in the painted chest, the brass candlestick, the bed with a real mattress. Unease in the knowledge that each object shines a little too brightly in the eyes of your neighbors. Wealth warms you, but it also casts shadows, and in a crowded medieval town, shadows are never empty. Legacy. It's a grand word, isn't it? You hear it in sermons when priests thunder about salvation and damnation. You see it carved into the shields of nobles who parade their lineage back to the Norman conquest. You sense it in the abbey stones, laid by masons who knew their work would outlast them by centuries. Legacy, for most people in your world, is something unreachable, or at least something fragile, slipping away like smoke before the fire has even cooled. And yet here you are, a middling soul, not quite poor, not quite noble, hovering in the in-between. You don't have a castle to leave behind, nor a title to pass on. But still, in quiet ways, you begin to wonder, what will remain when you are gone? Your first thought is always your children. A merchant's son, a craftsman's daughter, they are the living extension of your hopes. You push them to learn letters, to marry well, to carry the trade further than you did. Perhaps your son will expand the workshop, open a stall in another town, or even attend university if the family can stretch the purse strings. Perhaps your daughter will marry into another guild family, merging fortunes, cementing bonds. This is your legacy, as tangible as the wood beams above your head. Not immortal fame, perhaps, but survival and maybe, if fortune smiles, improvement. But children are unpredictable. Apprenticeships fail, marriages sour, illness strikes. You've seen families pour everything into one heir, only for plague to carry him off before 20. Others end up with daughters only, and while scholars debate how much influence women truly held in medieval trade, the law often makes them vanish in the records. You hope, you pray, you scheme, but legacy through children is a gamble, one with no guarantees. So you turn to other forms of memory. Property, for instance. That timbered house you painstakingly improved, the painted shutters, the carved chest, perhaps these will survive, reminding your grandchildren of your labor. A good house in a decent part of town carries weight. It's proof that you clawed upward from humbler origins. The townsfolk remember whose family lives where, who came up from nothing. Walls speak, even if stones don't. Then there's reputation. You've worked hard to be known as fair in trade, reliable in accounts, generous enough in charity. A good name lingers after death. People still recall that one guildsman who funded the parish lamp or the widow who endowed bread for the poor at Easter. In a world without newspapers, reputation is the closest thing to press coverage. A whisper of your kindness or your stinginess may echo longer than you expect. Of course, you're not immune to vanity. You imagine your name inscribed somewhere permanent. Perhaps a brass plate in the church floor with your figure engraved, hands clasped in prayer. Those brasses are surprisingly durable, though children sometimes rub them to a sheen by sliding across them in mischief. Maybe you commission a small stained glass window with your family crest, something modest, but still bright when the morning sun slants through. These are not just pious gifts. They are attempts to shout into the future, "I was here." Quirky tidbit. In some towns, prosperous families secretly inserted puns or symbols of their trade into their memorials. A baker's loaf carved into stone, a tailor's shears tucked into the corner of a brass. These little jokes often puzzled later generations, who thought they were cryptic codes. Imagine future scholars debating whether your carving of a shoe meant you were a cobbler, or whether it symbolized the journey of life. You chuckle at the thought. But legacy is also threatened. Fires sweep through towns, floods rot foundations, wars march across fields. The house you cherish may not last a century. The guild that guards your craft might dwindle as fashions change. The very market where you haggled daily could shift when trade routes alter. You've seen it happen. What was once the pride of a town fades into ruin, remembered only in half-accurate tales told by old men at the tavern. Historians still argue whether the medieval middle class thought much about posterity at all, or whether survival alone was enough to occupy them. Some evidence, wills, donations, memorials, suggests a deep concern with being remembered. Other records, or the lack of them, hint that most people lived fully in the present, leaving little trace once gone. The truth, as ever, probably lies in the middle. Most townsfolk didn't dream of fame, but they did hope not to vanish entirely. And there's the rub, isn't it? Lords may be sung about by troubadours, kings chronicled by monks, bishops carved in effigy. You risk being forgotten within 2 generations, your name reduced to a line in a parish registry if that. Even your bones may not stay undisturbed. Churchyards grow crowded, graves are reused. The thought is sobering. You, who worked so hard to balance between poverty and power, might leave behind nothing but faint echoes. Unless you find other ways. Stories told by neighbors may last longer than stone. A clever saying you're known for might pass into local proverb. A recipe, a craft trick, a tune hummed in the workshop, all can ripple onward invisibly. Not fame, but influence. Think of the brewer who perfected a certain ale. Generations later, people still drink it, never knowing his name. Perhaps that is a kind of legacy too. And sometimes, accidents help. Maybe your will gets copied into the town records because of a dispute, preserving your name for centuries. Maybe a love letter you scribbled ends up tucked into a book that survives in some dusty monastery. Maybe your merchant's ledger, dull with numbers, becomes a treasure for a future historian eager to reconstruct wool prices. Strange to think that what bores you might fascinate someone unborn. So you sit by the hearth at twilight watching shadows climb the beams, and you turn the question over. What is your legacy? Wealth that may vanish, children who may fail, a house that may burn, a brass plate walked over by generations of restless parishioners. Perhaps, but perhaps also the subtler things. A reputation for fairness, a kindness remembered, a prayer whispered by someone who never met you but benefited from your alms. Legacy in your world is not about glory. It is about persistence, holding on just enough that the tide of time doesn't sweep you away entirely. You are not a king. You are not a knight. You are a middling soul, balanced between poverty and power. Hopping your life will leave some trace, not immortal, not eternal, but real. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Dawn creeps into your chamber, thin and gray, and you stir awake with that half-dreaming thought still lingering. What will remain of you when your body is dust? For all the years of trading, bargaining, working, and worrying, the future has a way of shrinking your achievements into whispers. You turn on the straw mattress, creak your back, and listen to the first bell of the day ring out from the parish tower. It sounds like both a summons and a reminder. Time marches, whether you want it to or not. Your mind drifts to the marketplace outside. Already, apprentices will be dragging out barrels, setting up stalls, shouting half-heartedly as they yawn. The market is a theater of continuity. Each generation repeats the same motions, unloading sacks, tallying coins, arguing over quality. You wonder how many of today's names will still matter a century hence. Will the great wool merchants who swagger in furs today be remembered, or will their houses collapse when heirs quarrel? That's the fragility of the middle rank. You rise high enough to taste comfort, to leave your children something more than patched hose and borrowed tools, yet not high enough to carve your story into the great chronicles. You may slip into obscurity almost as easily as a peasant who never touched a coin. Still, legacy doesn't only live in parchment or marble, it hides in smaller places. You think of the guild, that sturdy brotherhood you joined in your 20s. Your dues, your attendance, your arguments over bylaws, they all seem tedious in the moment, yet they build something larger than you. Centuries from now, when the guild hall beams are blackened and the crest faded, some curious archivist may still unroll the minute book and read your name in the margin. A small spark across time. Mainstream fact here. Many guild records did survive, tucked away in chests or monasteries, preserving names of ordinary men and women who would otherwise have been forgotten. Imagine your scribbled signature, cramped by candlelight, ink blotched, lying under glass in a future museum. A scrap of your hand surviving in a world you could never imagine. Of course, not every guildman is remembered so gently. Quirky tidbit. One guild in Norwich accidentally immortalized a member not for his skill, but for his terrible flatulence during meetings. The secretary, clearly annoyed, recorded it with as much formality as dues payments. Historians centuries later burst out laughing when they found the line. You secretly dread such an afterlife, not as the wise merchant, but the one who cleared the hall. Still, historians argue endlessly whether medieval people like you cared much about fame beyond their parish. Some claim ordinary folk were pragmatic. You worked, you prayed, you died, and that was enough. Others believe the flood of memorial brasses, chantry chapels, and guild donations prove an anxious hunger to endure. Perhaps it depended on the person. For you, the desire is there not for songs sung in royal courts, but for a footprint, however faint. And there are other, subtler marks. That child you helped with alms might remember you kindly. That apprentice you trained may teach another, passing on your tricks with wood grain or your knack for haggling. Your laugh, your sayings, your gestures, these may echo through people who never know your name. Legacy can be invisible, woven into lives rather than carved into stone. Yet you're no fool. Fires rage, plagues sweep, famine strikes. Your careful household accounts might feed worms in the church cellar. Your bones may be tossed aside when the yard grows crowded. In the face of such erasure, you take comfort in something simpler, living fully in the now. Drinking the ale while it's still frothy, enjoying your children's chatter before they're grown, relishing the brief triumph of a good bargain. Perhaps the real legacy isn't survival at all, but savoring the thread you're given. So when twilight falls and you walk home from market, you let yourself smile. The cobblestones echo your steps. The tavern door bursts with laughter. A dog trots at your heels, tail wagging. For tonight, this is enough. You are here between poverty and power, balancing on the fragile edge of memory. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And now, as we close the shutters on this long wander through medieval middle-class England, let the pace soften. Imagine the market square dimming, stalls closed, torches guttering, the last echoes of voices fading into the night. The air grows cooler, carrying the faint smoke of hearth fires curling above rooftops. You walk more slowly now, steps lighter, as though the weight of history itself eases from your shoulders. The houses along the lane lean inward, their beams creaking like tired old friends whispering secrets. Somewhere, a lullaby drifts through an open shutter, a mother humming to soothe a restless child. The rhythm is timeless. You could have heard it 600 years ago or 6 minutes ago. In that thought there is comfort. Yes, the records of merchants blur, houses crumble, names slip away. But the essence of life, laughter, work, love, loss, hope, persists like an endless candle passed hand to hand. You are part of that chain, your flame bright enough to touch those near you, even if history forgets your name. So breathe slowly. Feel the weight of blankets over your body, the steady hush of your own breath in the quiet. Time stretches, softens, slows. The clang of the marketplace bells is far away now, replaced by the soothing hum of night. Rest here, knowing you've glimpsed what it was like to live between poverty and power, to stand in that middle place where survival and ambition wrestle gently. And with that, we leave the medieval streets behind, closing the door softly, letting silence settle. Sleep well, traveler. Sweet dreams.